Hello and welcome to Capital Hill. I'm Lyndal Curtis. There must be a little something about opposition leaders, taxation and animal references. Kim Beazley once called John Howard's GST a blue duck. Today, Tony Abbott has said the carbon tax will be more like a python squeeze than a cobra strike. The latest opinion polls show Mr Abbott is just as unpopular as Julia Gillard, although both of their satisfaction ratings are higher than Labor's primary vote. And also today, the Communications and Media Authority, ACMA, has found there was no substantive breach by Channel 9 of licence conditions over a sports broadcast critical of the government's poker machine reforms. Joining me to discuss this and much more besides are Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer and Labor MP Stephen Jones. Welcome to you both.
G'day Kelly, good to be with you.
G'day, hi.
If I could start first with events on the stock markets. Asian stock markets and Australia's are down. There are worries about US jobs growth, worries too about China's economic growth. Kelly O'Dwyer, the Reserve Bank Board meets tomorrow. Should the board cut interest rates?
Look, I'm not in a position to be advising the Reserve Bank Board, but I will say this, Lyndal. We saw $22 billion wiped off the stock market today. We are seeing a perilous economic situation in Europe, also as well in the United States when you consider the debt position over there as well. And there are great concerns about our position here in Australia to be able to deal with all of the repercussions from what's going on in the global economic climate. We're in a very different economic situation to the one that we were in 2007. We had repaid back $96 billion of Labor's debt. We had left a surplus of $20 billion, and we had a net position of $70 billion. Of course, we've now got net debt of over $130 billion, and the gross debt ceiling the government has just raised again to now $300 billion.
But
it's very, very different.
But interest rates are at 3.75%. There is quite a deal of room for the Reserve Bank to move and do the heavy lifting should the economy need it, isn't there?
Well, look, the Reserve Bank have got levers at their disposal, of course, to lower the cash rate. But you talk about interest rates, and on average, under the coalition government, interest rates were lower. Interest rates were lower under us. They're higher under this government on average. You just need to look. Well, you just need to look.
They're lower
figures.
now than they were when we took office, and the average Australian with a mortgage is paying less than $3,000 a year less than they were under your government. I'll go directly to the issue though. I know the people in my electorate would welcome an interest rate cut. They're doing it tough. While the mining sector is booming, retail is struggling and other areas of the economy are struggling. There is concern about what's going on overseas, and a bit of relief with the family mortgage or the small business loans would make a big difference to people in my electorate and right around the country.
Is the surplus potentially at risk though, Stephen, if demand from China is weaker, if the turmoil in Europe continues and the US economy remains weak? Does that put the surplus at risk?
We're still confident on our budget projections. I would say this, Lyndal, yes, there is uncertainty in Europe and in the US, but there's not a country in the world that you'd rather be in at the moment with the strong fundamentals that we have than Australia. And everyone who returns from overseas tells me that Australia is in a far better position than just about any other country in the world. No reason for complacency. We still need to have tight fiscal policy, and we've put that in place with this budget. But a bit of relief on monetary policy would also be very welcome.
Kelly, if I could just follow up just quickly your comment about interest rates. When John Howard referred to interest rates saying they'd always be under the coalition, always be lower under the coalition than under Labor, he was referring to the cash rate, wasn't he? Not the commercial bank's interest rates.
Well, what I'm referring to is the commercial bank's interest rate. On average, it was actually lower under us than it has been under this current government. So, I don't know what facts Stephen's looking at, but on average, it has in fact been lower under us. But the point I'd just like to raise in response to what
they're still paying less on interest rates than they were.
If you'll let me just finish. The point that Stephen made before about people doing it tough, I mean, he is right about that. I mean, people are doing it tough right now. Cost of living is really really extreme for so many families, which is why it is really beyond belief that this government is right now, in less than 28 days' time, going to bring in the world's greatest carbon tax. It's going to hit every Australian family, every Australian business. It's a $9 billion a year tax. It's going to go up and up for the next 3 years.
We'll come back to the carbon tax, but first I'd like to talk about the ACMA findings into Channel 9, and here's a little reminder of what it was about.
Funding from clubs is the lifeblood of many community programs and initiatives that we all enjoy. So for more information, go to won'tworkwillhurt.com.au.
Yeah, the proposed mandatory pre-commitment that they've put forward is a rubbish policy. It won't work. It won't solve the problem they say they're going to target, and it will do irreparable damage to the hospitality industry. It won't work, and it will hurt. They're 100% right.
Now, ACMA found that found a problem with the way Channel 9 dealt with complaints about that broadcast, but said the broadcast itself didn't breach conditions dealing with political matter because it was a sports program. ACMA has flagged a possible change to the code to include programs such as sports broadcasts. Stephen, is that a recognition that really political matter can be discussed on any sort of program and should be covered by the rules?
Look, I think the ACMA decision today is a recognition of a few things. Clearly, that was a political comment, a bit of an ad. That's fair enough. The commentators, Channel 9, is entitled to express its views, but it should have said that this was a political comment, that it was intervening in a live and very hot political debate at that point in time. And I think ACMA has also identified there's probably some gaps in the voluntary code that operates in the broadcasting industry.
Kelly, do you think that the programs like sports programs should be included under the sections of the legislation that deal with political matter?
Well, look, I think ACMA ultimately found, though, that nothing had been breached, and I think that's the point that is most salient in all of this. And Stephen's right when he says, Channel 9's entitled to express their point of view on their program. I don't see any fundamental problem with that. In terms of actually looking at broader rules, well, I think you'd have to look at that in totality, and I'm sure that we would look at what potential extensions to those rules should be applied. Would look at that and evaluate that.
Well, we'll move back now to the carbon tax. It begins on July the 1st. Tony Abbott has previously said the tax will hurt from day one. Now he's using a slightly different approach.
Now, from July the 1st, which is less than 4 weeks away, Australians are faced with this carbon tax. It's going to be a python squeeze rather than a cobra strike, but it is going to hurt from day one, and as time goes by, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
Stephen, Greg Combet told this program on Friday only 250 of the slightly less than 500 companies who'll pay the tax know that they'll be paying it. The first instalments are not due on next June, so the real impact might be felt much closer to the next election, mightn't it?
Look, the real impact will be nothing like what Tony Abbott's been running around the country talking about. This is the guy who's been predicting whole towns are going to get wiped off the map. Interesting, he's now stepping back from that overblown rhetoric because he's worked out, and his backbench has worked out, that all of those things that he's predicting aren't going to occur, and these massive price hikes and all the rest of it that he's been talking about won't come to eventuate. And Kelly mentioned a few moments ago about concerns about cost of living increases. If they were really concerned about cost of living increases, they wouldn't have voted against the school kids bonus, which they voted against in the House, and they wouldn't have voted against the other measures that we've put in place to deliver relief to households at the moment.
Kelly, I've had a bit of a look back at what Kim Beazley used to say about the GST. He said at one point, John Howard's GST will snake down every suburban street, into every mailbox once a month, in the envelope with the telephone bill, into the shopping bag every week with the supermarket docket, and it will be there on every child's birthday and every Christmas time. Were his warnings then any different to the sorts of warnings that Tony Abbott is making now, and will the same thing come to pass, that it actually won't be as bad as the opposition leader at the time predicted?
Well, there are a couple of points to make. First and foremost, Before the GST was actually introduced, Lyndal, the GST was actually taken as a policy by the coalition to an election, and it was voted upon, and there was a mandate that was actually given to deliver it. We had to explain why it was that the GST was important as a reform, and people accepted that, and they were willing to support the government in actually making those changes because they understood we were getting rid of a whole heap of taxes.
But what about the economic impact?
The GST. We'd actually modelled the impact at the time. Now, this government, by contrast, of course, went to the election. They promised not to deliver a carbon tax. They are delivering a carbon tax. They haven't done proper modelling. In fact, we saw muck-ups in their modelling that they did do when they modelled it at $26 a tonne before doing it at $23 a tonne and vice versa. And so they couldn't come out with proper figures, but the one thing that they did say and they did predict, and we know that there is a lot of accuracy in that, is that the electricity prices are going to go up by 10%, and that's just for starters.
But in that case, hasn't the modelling been proved right that the regulators in the states have done what exactly what the Treasury modelling forecast?
Well, that's for starters. I mean, this is for starters. It's going to go. We believe it's going to go up and up because it's going to flow through the economy. And the government has said it's only going to have a small impact. We can't see how that's in fact justified. We know just by talking to business, by talking to not-for-profit hospitals, that it's going to have a direct impact on them in year one. I was talking to a hospital in my own electorate of Higgins, which is a not-for-profit hospital. They've calculated the impact of the carbon tax on them is going to be around about $400,000 a year. I talked to a small business owner who actually does a fair bit of manufacturing. He's got a number of people here who work for him. He said the impact on him is going to be around $500,000. So we're talking about very significant impacts that are going to have flow through.
Yeah, very small part of most of those operations' overall expenditure. Very small part, less than 10%. In fact, the New South Wales government's figures, no friend of ours, Barry O'Farrell, the IPART figures that have been released last week on the impact of carbon pricing, spot on the money, less than 10% increase. Plus, now, and this is an important point, the measures that we are putting in place will ensure that we are supporting alternative energy, that we are putting assistance into households and also putting in place the pricing mechanism which will ensure people will find ways to reduce their power bill. That, after all, is the point of the whole exercise.
In the end, though, Stephen, given Labor's opinion poll standing for many, many months now, you need not only people to feel comfortable with the impact on their cost of living, but in the end to feel so comfortable that they're no longer concerned by the fact that introducing the carbon tax is widely perceived as a breach of promise.
Lyndal, what people will understand is that the world isn't going to fall in, and all of these wild predictions that Tony Abbott has been running around the country talking about won't come to pass. He'll be shown up to be the fraud and the hypocrite that he is, and people will get on with their lives making the small adjustments that we need to make now so that we don't have to make massive adjustments in 10 or 15 years' time.
And that's
the thing is, Lyndal,
just very quickly, Kelly.
I was going to say the one thing, though, that the Labor Party won't guarantee is that people won't be worse off. And the reason they won't guarantee that is because they can't, because they know it's going to impact them.
You won't guarantee that your outlandish claims are going to come true, Kelly, because you know they're false.
And that's where we'll have to leave it. Kelly O'Dwyer and Stephen Jones, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Lyndal.
And thank you for joining Capital Hill. Please be with us